we're going to have a discussion here about whether clouds can actually make business better. So I'd like to welcome out my panelists for this discussion, Steve, Ellie, and John. Come on out, guys. So while they're coming out, I want to sort of set the stage a little bit. There's a good argument to be made that in the past few years, the killer feature of businesses being successful has moved from scale, how big you are, to cycle time, how fast you can adapt. And that IT is the sort of central nervous system that lets companies do that. And everybody is running around in pursuit of agility. Agility is a horribly overused word. I think I've heard it at least 20 times in the last week or so. And nobody really knows what it means, but we're being told that technologies like lean startup and agile development and DevOps and cloud computing can make us all more agile. And that apparently agility is going to make us more successful in an era of cycle time and adaptivity trumping scale for businesses. So what I'm hoping to discuss in the next 20 minutes or so with my colleagues here is whether or not cloud computing can make business better, whether it does make it better, and what else is necessary to actually achieve that. So I'm going to get started by asking you guys to introduce yourselves and say a little bit about what you do so the audience knows who you are, and then we'll get to discussing it.
Excellent. I'm John Considine. I'm the CTO of Verizon Terramark. We provide data center services, cloud, co-location, security services, basically everything across the board for IT services.
Hi there, I'm Steve Shalita with NetScout, look after marketing. NetScout provides performance management both on the enterprise and the service provider markets.
I'm Eli Almog. I'm the cloud CTO at CSC. CSC is a pretty big service provider. They provide cloud services, but end-to-end IT management.
All right, so do you guys think that we've moved to an era where cycle time is a more important factor for corporate competitiveness than just being big?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And is that, how does the cloud factor into making that happen? Is the cloud what you need, or is there other stuff that organizations are sort of overlooking because they think cloud is some kind of magical pixie dust?
Well, you would think that the cloud is actually enabling it, right? I mean, just kind of across the board. And we see it in terms of who's consuming the resources, instead of necessarily running through the IT process, the IT departments, the idea that the businesses can get the resources they want directly is part of that process of speeding things up, and it's gaining momentum, amazingly within the industry.
So, go ahead.
So, infrastructure as a service is really commoditized. The margins are very, very small. Most of the organizations know how to do it now. Most of the cloud providers know how to do it now. And talking agility, it's really get us into focus on what we need to focus, which is the application space itself. And there, the challenges are much, much, much bigger, where companies can make the assumption, infrastructure, don't worry about it, you can get it. It's no big deal anymore.
Do you think we've arrived at a point where infrastructure is commodity now and we can sort of take it for granted, or what do we still need to worry about when it comes to infrastructure?
So, if you look at the lower level, that's commodity, we can forget about it. However, all the challenges that we had in the past and what it takes to do change management, performance management, capacity planning, none of those disappear. Actually, with cloud, they got magnified.
They become significantly more important.
Absolutely. You have more instances of the operating system. They show up fairly quick. They can disappear very quick. But you still need to manage all of them. You still need to have everything under control, audit, compliance. The amount of noise that gets generated right now is huge. And if we think that in the past we didn't do good enough business in really managing our IT, now it's a big deal.
So I don't think I agree that it's commoditized yet. I think that at the very low level you can think of it as commoditized, but the services and the capability still have a ways to go to become, we talk a lot about it now, the architectures, things people are doing in the cloud are about brand new applications and new architectures, and awesome, right? A lot of great things going on there. But the reality is I think the infrastructure can still do a lot more, and I look at it as giving the applications, the developers, the higher level functions more capabilities, right? So better building blocks kind of across the board.
Yeah, I was talking to Mark Thiel yesterday, and he said that the best example of commoditized technology is a motherboard. Like, we all know we need it, but it got to a point where there's like one or two motherboard vendors that worked. Like, we all used Phoenix BIOS. Nobody said I'm a better company because I have Phoenix BIOS, but it allowed us to very quickly rack and stack standardized infrastructure. So do you think we'll get to a point where infrastructure as a service is like a motherboard for business?
I think infrastructure matters in a significant way. I agree with John in that there's still a lot to do there. There's some drives to try and commoditize different aspects of the infrastructure and SDN type architectures and where that goes. But the network fundamentally in the infrastructure side and the compute side are really what bring it all together, right? You need the robustness there and the resiliency to be able to deliver those services. So I think that has to continue to evolve. And then the focus really, as John talked about, on the services, the applications that you're going to deliver there to really bring the innovation.
So Ellie, you mentioned that above the sort of infrastructure layer, we get to applications, and that's where the real differentiation comes from. No employee was ever promoted because of how many compute cycles they used. Maybe they're promoted by how many tasks they did or how many jobs they completed. So, and that seems to be an application layer metric. So how does that change the CIO's thinking when they become increasingly related to the performance and even the compensation of the people in the organization?
Right. So first of all, CIOs became right now real business managers. It's all about money. It's all about, manage your IT as a business like any other businesses. While in a typical organization, this is an overhead business unit, right? Because they're there to do the business, financial services, banking, selling stocks, whatever it may be, right? And that's where the focus should be. So by providing CIOs the ability to reduce the cost right now, I don't need to buy a data center. I don't need to deal with all the break fix and the challenges that I have when I buy my own hardware and get into refresh cycles. If all those things going away, then you really can spend most of the time on the most important thing is develop my applications in a very quick time to market, feature release, so maybe I can beat a little bit the competition by having new features in my environment and enable them to really focus on the most important thing for IT is provide the right application for the business to be more successful.
Yeah. So let me ask you a slightly different organization competitive question. It's important to ask ourselves things like why isn't Blockbuster Netflix? I mean, if you go back 10 years, Blockbuster had all of the customers. Yeah. They had all of the rental records for what you like to watch. They had all of the licenses for the DVDs. They had all of your payment information. And yet Netflix completely lapped them, and now Blockbuster's bankrupt. A lot of organizations are wondering, am I Blockbuster? And the hope is that cloud is somehow going to make them more agile and more able to respond to this threat and more able to adapt. What else is needed from organizations besides cloud to sort of, what has to change culturally for that?
I think it's a consistent kind of challenge in business cycles, right, of innovation. Blockbuster is a great example, but you have examples like Wang, like other companies that miss the transitions and aren't able to make that adaptation, right? And I think that technology enables those transitions to happen significantly faster today, and being able to leverage that technology to get there is a huge advantage if you can make those shifts as these transitions are happening, right? Capturing the transition is probably the key differentiator today.
Because it does seem like clouds are the lubricant that lets it happen really easily. Netflix didn't learn a lot of capital to get that running because they could buy the capacity on demand.
Well, so we look at this, right, in fact, I was at a startup conference in Boston the end of last week, and we talked about innovation and speed of innovation, just this topic, but in the lens of startups, new developers, new products. And what really becomes apparent is the cloud unlocks the stranglehold of IT, right? So if you think about traditionally trying to get software or hardware or whatever into a data center, it gets put into the process, and this is part of your answer, it gets put into the IT process, the approvals, the racks, the stacks, all of these things. And the idea now is with all of that infrastructure effectively uncontrolled in the cloud, people can get what they want, they can try new things, there's new routes to markets for products and across the board, really disruptive. And so I think in the middle of that is the notion that the process that's put in place in big companies is backwards looking, for sure. And then the idea is that cloud gives you an opportunity to disrupt those processes. But I say this, is the only way IT won't really participate in cloud computing, the disruption that is cloud computing, is to try to stop it.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely. So I think you basically, as an IT organization, you have more time all of a sudden. You don't need to deal with electricians to install your hardware or put it in the data centers. You don't need to negotiate, with contracts with suppliers for hardware. All this tremendous amount of time that you're spending just getting the box up and running so I can do what I need to do. It's all gone. You have a lot of more time in your hand right now, as I say, to focus on other things.
So,
And it doesn't mean that the people that did this job before gotta go. You simply repurpose them to more productive activities for the business.
So, I mean, to vulgarize that a little, clouds kind of let you throw more spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks more frequently.
Yeah.
But, I mean, that results in a really messy living room if you aren't more selective about what you're throwing. I mean, to stretch that analogy past the breaking point. What do companies need to do to be smarter about the process of experimentation? Because I agree with you, the barriers to entry down, cloud is like lubricant for innovation, but that doesn't mean you should just randomly run off in all directions. What does the business need to do to direct that energy into changes that make the business better?
Right. So I think you don't throw everything over the wall and see what will stick. That doesn't work. When you go to cloud, you really need to spend some time, design the cloud offering, the cloud that you buy from whatever service provider you have around your application and around your workload. Because it really depends what you put there. And if the maturity is there, and depends on the application, some things need to stay behind, some things need to go up front. Also, when you're talking cloud, the first connotation for many people is it's public, it's there, everybody's sharing it. Enterprises not jumping so quick to public clouds. And many of them doing awesome business in the first stage of cloud, which is really go as private. It's still yours, it's still your network that connected directly to the provider. It's still your data that is 100% secure. You don't share the hardware with anybody. That's the first stage that most of companies will be there pretty soon. But we already have companies that went above and beyond. And again, based on the kind of workloads that they put in place, they felt that being in a full public environment, it's perfect for them. But you need to do this judgment call, and you really need to think ahead of time and design where you're going to cloud, around the workload that you put over there first.
Sure. And Steve, I just want to ask you a question here real briefly. We talk about making business better. If you're looking at a B2C application, better is pretty easy to track, right? It's I got more revenue, more clicks, more engagement, whatever I'm after. In an enterprise, it's harder to do that with the tools people are using to complete their job because you're asking someone to use a tool that they're paid to use anyway. So that employee kind of has to use it whether they like it or not. Right. But there's great evidence that performance and availability drives productivity and sort of worker satisfaction and churn and so on. What's the role as we move up the stack from this infrastructure to sort of business experimentation and so on? What's the role of performance management and monitoring in that new world?
I think there's two sides, right? So from a cloud provider perspective, I think you're relatively early days in what cloud providers are providing in managing their own environments and then providing metrics back to the enterprise. And that keeps mission critical apps out of the cloud and kind of inhibits really the acceleration of cloud adoption.
Some of the caution Eli was talking about.
And I think that's a key factor. And part of that is conditioning from the earlier days of build it and they will come kind of mentalities because it is a substantial investment. I think on the enterprise side, it also requires a significantly different view of how you look at performance. More and more enterprises have spent a significant amount of time and effort in improving the availability and the resiliency of their environment, whether it be traditional data center, private cloud environments. But even as they move to early types of cloud deployments like software as a service, there's still a significant amount of interaction from that public-based cloud connection into their data center and into their environments. So I think it requires rethinking that level of performance. And as you talked about user experience, availability of those services, and ultimately it comes down to latency as you're moving workloads around, leveraging cloud for different types of purposes, whether it be dealing with disaster recovery or business agility in the sense of having that elasticity.
So John, do you find that people properly understand the implications of moving to a cloud, public or private SaaS cloud on what their existing business is, or are we sort of the grass is greener on the other side of the cloud, so we're going to go think that'll be wonderful?
Yeah, well, obviously we have a lot of people using our cloud. We see a lot of different businesses doing things, but it is an interesting thing because there is a bit of a grass is greener because there's so much opportunity and so little understanding of actually what's going on. But I just want to go back to your previous conversation about enterprises or businesses can't throw a lot of spaghetti at the wall, and I think they can. That's actually the point here, right? And maybe something we were talking about earlier around metrics. if you don't want to be the blockbuster, you don't want to be down that path of, we're on our business, there's nothing we can do about it. The fast fail, we learned this from the startup world, the idea of getting things out there and figure out if they work or not. I don't know there's a lot inhibiting companies from doing more in the cloud. The key point to the business is how you evaluate the outcomes of those things, right? So I don't care that your living room is filled with spaghetti, right? In the end, if you can pick out and say, oh, there's some meatballs with that one, that's great, that's what we're going to take, is really where it's at. And so we see, people moving up the stack for cloud. We had projected long ago that would follow the virtualization track, test dev, non-critical apps, moving up the stack, the cloud would follow that same thing, and I'd say it's fast following. And so what we look for is the time where things flip over, and we look for companies to say why, you have to justify why not to do cloud versus why do
and
cloud.
I think we've hit that tipping point this year where I'm starting to hear people go, do you really need servers for that? Like, why can't we use this in the cloud? And that's a very different conversation from where we are.
Well, there's a big shift that's happened, right? So the traditional model in IT is broken, kind of, you think of IT spending and priorities in 3 areas: run, grow, and transform. And over the past 3 years, it's all been about running the business, and really the focus and effort on grow and transformation were really down on the priority list. What we've seen really from a number of different market data views that shifted from late 2012 into 2013 with the surveys is there's much more interest in the grow side. Growth is becoming a #1 factor for most business organizations, North America and Europe, but also the transformation, because that's been held back for probably 4 or 5 years. And I think that cloud enables you to achieve that much more simply being able to reduce the cost and have that ability to try, but you still ultimately have to prioritize because resources are not growing, people aren't being more available to do things, and then you have to manage all that.
So Eli, Doc Searles, who's one of the guys that penned the Clue Train Manifesto, said that in a world of scarcity, we make money from something like diamonds. In a world of abundance, we make money because of something like open source software. It seems to me like for 50 years, IT has been in the business of managing scarcity, right? That's why it was okay for us to carry punch cards in the basement at 3 in the morning.
Yep.
And now we're in clouds are IT in an era of abundance. Yeah. And so we need to make money because of them. So to the points that were raised earlier, is the CIO moving from a job of cost containment to a job of revenue maximization as a consequence of that?
Yeah, and I think most of them are smart enough to realize that they had to change dramatically. And if not, then you will see that most of the decisions will be made by CFOs on technology.
Or the CMO is
CMO,
right?
Yeah,
on the CMOs, on technology, and the CIOs that didn't adapt to that changes probably are not there anymore. Yeah. So yeah, you got to go this direction. You got to understand that the game changed, and you really need to move the focus into these kinds of growth. So again, and I think it's a good opportunity for CIOs, because the biggest problem wasn't I can't develop application. It wasn't that. It was always the infrastructure. It was always the data centers. I come from financial services, and we built tons of data centers in Wall Street. And before you put the first network drop in your new data centers, it's already oversubscribed. You need to build another one. And never end, and that's what killed us over there. Now, if all that, or portion of it, let's say not all of that, are going away, you have so much more room to focus exactly on that, on the growth, on changing the way you manage IT, absolutely. If I may, I want to jump for a second back to your question around performance. So going to cloud doesn't mean you lose any of your control. If you think you lose control, you didn't pick up the right provider. You need to be able to manage, change the management of your infrastructure to SLAs, and find your service provider accountable for those SLAs. So you need transparency to application behavior, transparency to how billing is working for you. You don't lose any of those. You simply don't do it by yourself. But if you get the metrics back, if you get the communication and transparency back to you so you can control and communicate to your business unit, I see capacity planning where it's going. I don't care the hardware portion of it, but I know that my application is consuming more and more, and I need to plan for that. All those things didn't go away. They become like the tool for you to blame somebody else.
But it's got to move to end-to-end. And the challenge is you're now dealing with multiple domains. And the cloud operator that provides you metrics from a performance perspective on workload performance and availability in their data center is going to be more appealing to you to consume services from than one that doesn't, right? And SLAs. But you still got to extend that out because your enterprise users, whether they're on your premise or through mobility, through mobile applications, are still accessing that data. And that's where I think it needs to get to in a blended service model. Services are going to live in your data center, in the cloud, on a hybrid basis, and you've got to get to that point of doing it.
So if I understand, you're saying we're not really moving to the cloud, we're just adding another thing we got to worry about, and you have sort of an n factorial addition of connections, right?
Service delivery becomes more complex, more multi-domain, and SDN adds to that same complexity, right? SDN doesn't mean you don't need performance in the same things. It means you need it even more.
Right, John?
But I think the key point here, and it's funny because we always treat cloud as something different, and there are attributes that are very different, but many companies run multiple data centers. They take down co-location. They do remote things. It's all the same at that level. I think the challenge for some companies, though, is treating the cloud is not that. Okay, and look, I mean, we do a lot of things. We have private networks. We have the MPLS network. There's a lot of things about extending that control from the enterprise out. But fundamentally, the cloud is another data center. We see some people struggling with the idea, particularly mid-size or smaller businesses that are having this experience for the first time. Everything's here. Everything's local. Now I'm using the cloud. It's a remote data center. WAN optimization, performance management, application stretching. There's a lot of things that change. But for the as they say, a lot of this isn't new. What is new, though, is the speed at which you can do things in the cloud.
And I think the real changes that enterprises are going to see is a result of increased speed, increased abundance, and less need to justify a big expenditure up front, which means you can try out a business model rather than defending a business plan. And that's like an attitudinal change. So we have a couple more seconds on the clock. Last thoughts on whether clouds can make business better?
I think so, absolutely. I mean, and all what we talked about is real indications for that. Again, focused on the most important thing, doing the business, not doing IT. IT is secondary.
Sure, Steve?
Yeah, I think cloud has a significant impact. It has and will continue to change everything. I think in the areas that we've talked about, it's really making the right business decisions to leverage cloud as part of that transformation. I think just like John said, it's another data center. It's part of the architecture, and you've got to look at it in that broad context, right? And partner with the cloud operators to bring that service delivery together.
Bring it all together. Look, I mean, I think it's already changing business in a fundamental way. And so I don't think there's any question whether the cloud is making or can make business better. The interesting part is I think we've been talking about, it changes the patterns, the buyers, the controls, all of these things shift, but to the better, because it's actually letting us leverage the scale, the efficiency, the capability of big resources and have smaller resources be able to consume them.
Great. All right. So I apologize to all of you for abusing the spaghetti metaphor beyond any reasonable justification. Thank you all very much for joining me, and good conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.